Hey guys, this is Abhay Sharma for thinkingpenguin.com and welcome to my YouTube channel. And in this video, I'm going to talk about how you can increase the performance of animation node trees. There are many ways you can improve the performance of animation nodes, but especially in this video, I'm going to talk about the caching options. And the caching option is not available on every single object, every single node of the animation nodes, but they belong to a special category. So if you click on this subprogram node, you will see script, loop, and node, and these nodes can use the caching options. So I'm going to create all of it, loop and groups. Excuse me, I did not turn on my start display. So whenever I press a key, you will see the display, okay, here in the viewport. Okay, so we have created the script, loop, and group node, and these nodes can utilize the caching options. So the first one, let's just talk about the loop node. So if I create the invoke node, okay, invoke subprogram, you'll see that as soon as I create this, the performance counter starts to run. And basically, if you go into the properties, this is the T panel. So if you click on the T on your keyboard, it will open up, or you can just click on the plus button. So by default, the always is checked on. It means that no matter if you're doing something or not, it always keep updating the node tree. And if you're working on simple projects, it's fine, it's no problem. But if the project is going to be big, it's going to be complicated, you should turn this thing off and turn on tree changed, frame changed, and property changed. I have already talked about these things in my previous tutorials, but anyway, I'm going to give you a basic information. So tree changed is basically whenever you add or remove any node in the node tree, it will update. Frame change means whenever you update the frame, whenever you scrub the playhead in the timeline, it will update. And the property changed is whenever you change any property in any node, okay, it will update. So we were talking about caching options. So if you select the main node that is going to be used, and if you go into the N panel, so by default it may be turned on or may not. So just click the N key, press the N key on your keyboard. You can see that here. Go to the bottom and if you open the advanced node settings, you will see you have the options for caching. And also there is an option for, if you check this thing on, show cache options, these options will appear directly on your node tree. So you can go and change the property without going into the N panel, which is pretty cool. Okay, so this is a loop. Let's see how you can do the same thing with the scripts. So I'm going to create the invoke node, okay, and you see there is no caching option because we have to create some sort of input. So let's create a follow-up, and now if I select, I can turn on the caching options. Let's create this thing for group node. So create invoke node, add a input, and now I can turn on the caching option. So basically these these nodes can use the caching option in animation nodes. As far as I know, I think these three nodes can use the caching options. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Okay, so let me show you a real example. So I'm going to create a new project, turn on my start display. Okay, so what I'll do is I will import a couple of node trees I have created. Okay, and this is a part of a heads-up display pack I'm working on. Okay, so if you click on this subprogram, you can see you have a few nodes, a few loops, and a couple of group nodes. I renamed the group nodes in such a way that they appear in alphabetical order, and all the group nodes starts with compound, so it's easy to find. So I'm going to create the mark and marker, and I should rename this because otherwise it will become complicated. Marker. Okay, and let's create a Bezier spline. I'm going to hide this, and let's select this Bezier spline as our host spline, right? And I'm going to connect this mark group node as my list. This node is basically generating a bunch of, you know, a spline object straight lines. Okay, and I will just place it on the host spline, whatever spline you will specify in here, which is in this case we have a Bezier circle. Okay, and obviously we need a spline object output, so I'll create an object output and click on the plus button and just activate this. Now what I'll do is in the marks group node, currently iteration is set to 2, which means I can use these 2 elements. So let's increase this. Okay, and let's increase the second element a little bit bigger. So you see in the viewport that you have a circular ruler kind of thing, which I called marker. You can call it whatever you want. Okay, and yeah, we have created something. Okay, and you can see all right, you have to set this thing again. You probably like to, you know, set these things and just click on the save startup file, so you don't have to set this thing every time. Okay, now you can see that the performance counter is 3 ms. So, and it depends on the number of iterations. Okay, so basically this is a group node which has a lot of node inside it. Let me give you a sneak peek. So, you know, loops and stuff. So the performance depends on the number of copies I'm creating in here. So you can see, you can just pay attention on this number. Right now the performance counter is 3.8 ms or something. As soon as I increase the number of copies, you can see the number starts to increase, and it depends on, you know, number of, basically this is number of iteration or number of copies. It hits the performance. So, and this is just one element. Okay, let's say I am creating a heads up display kind of thing, and it has a lot of elements. So you have to ask this question to yourself: are you really going to need that much control for this object or not? If you're done with this, you just simply move on. Like, you just simply duplicate the object, shift D, and just move on to creating another element. So let's say I want to increase let's increase the scale, and let's make it, let's say I want to use all the properties, and I'm going to select and increase that, and every 5th spline is going to be like this, and this one is like this, or something like that. So let's say this is what I want. Do I need to animate these things? So if you do, then you have to probably keep this thing alive. Okay, otherwise, you know, just see the you always keep an eye on this performance counter. Okay, so let's say that I'm just going to, I just duplicated that. Now let's create another element. So I'm gonna scale it down, and this time I'm gonna use just one and turn it this thing something like this. I do not want that much loops, like 100. And let's create some copies, something like this. Let's create two, well, something like this. Okay, so 3 elements, but the element that is in the middle is only have this marker node which has all the controls of animation. Otherwise these are just like copies. These are like Blender objects with bunch of spline objects in it. So you can obviously use the standard animation methods like scaling and rotating and stuff like that, but they are not like live objects because they are not being generated with the marker. group node. Okay, so this is one of the way to keep the performance under check. So okay, so this is one of the way. Let me show you the other way which can also be used, and in that way you will also preserve all the node tree. So whenever you want to change any kind of property, you just do that and freeze the object, something like that. So let me show you that. So I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all these three things. I'm going to disconnect and just delete. Okay, so create a new object. Okay, so we have this. I'm going to turn the copies to 1. All right, and let's scale it up a little bit. Okay, so this is one of the element. Okay, and you can see right now it's 6.4 milliseconds. Okay, now you can obviously hit the shift D key to duplicate the object, or just simply click on this button right next to the splines, and you will see that if you change any property, it won't update. Basically it detaches itself. You see it's saying 8.4, but it's not. If you scrub the timeline, it falls to 5 point something milliseconds. Okay, so this is one of the way. And then what you can do is you duplicate the node and you create another spline object and you create another element. So this is another element, and I'm going to connect the same splines, same marks. So scale that thing up. Maybe I need a different kind of list. So set the iteration to 5, and let's set all these elements to 0, and I'm going to increase that, increase the fifth, and do this something something different. And then I just simply disable this. I know that whenever you duplicate this node, it will basically doubles the milliseconds. But what else you can do? Well, we can use the advanced. If you go to the advanced node settings and turn on the caching options, and if you go into the caching options, you have once per input, once per frame, one time, and disabled. By default it is set to disabled, which means it is not using any kind of caching. But if I set this to once per input, it will say the caching method is not available. I have asked this this question to Jax Luke, and he said that, I'm quoting him, once per input means that subprogram will be executed once per input configuration. This is useful when the subprogram only depends on its inputs and when it is only involved with a few different input combinations. There are also some limits which input and output types are allowed. You probably should not use it when you have a subprogram with many inputs, and we have a lot of inputs. So basically avoid it for now. Okay, so we'll move on to the second one, once per frame and one time. So if you set this to one time, it will basically stores all the input, and in a program or in a file, I don't know, basically it will store all the data one time. Okay, which does not involve any kind of animation. Okay, and you see that the performance is basically cut by half. If I set this one also to caching, I'll turn on the caching options, and I'm gonna turn this to 1. I'm gonna set this to 1 time, and if I scrub the timeline, you can see we basically gain a lot of performance. We are now 0.5 ms, half ms. So this is good. Okay, and whenever I want, let's say whenever I want to change the property of the element, because right now if you change anything, it's not going to update because the spline is not active. So even if I turn it active and you change anything, it's not gonna work because it is cached. So to do that, what you have to do is first you set this thing to disabled and click on clear and make sure that your splines are active, and then you change your properties. Okay, and when you're done with this, let's say I want more copies and stuff, you're done, set this to 1 time and disable your element and disable your splines. Okay, and in this way you can keep the performance under control. So basically you just keep doing this thing. So let's create another node, another spline, object output, splines, set this to disable, create a new object. For list, let's do this group node is pretty simple, so I'm not using the caching option, although it does have this option. So if you want to use it, you can click this thing. And what else I want to create? Well, let's scale it up and let's use copies. So something like this. Maybe to this, it's too much. It's too much. Let's do something like this. You know, whatever you want. Let's set this to 0.25 and create a few copies, like this. And then I set this to 1 time and turn it off. But always it's going to be editable whenever I want. Let's create another one, Shift D. This time I'm gonna use the same splines. Create another one. Alright, set this to disabled and clear the cache, and now I can set this to 0.75 and scale to 0.5. So and then you just set this to 1 time and turn this thing off. So now you can see we have 4 different elements, right? But with the performance is under control, which is very good. Okay, I really like this thing. Okay, and whenever you want to change any kind of property, just rename it every element that you are generating from animation node properly, so that you can identify which element is being generated by which node, right? So okay, so we have seen how one time works. Let's see how we can use once per frame. Once per frame is usable when you are trying to animate some properties. For example, let's say I want to animate this thing to from 0 to, okay, so first of all we have to set this to disabled, clear the cache and turn this thing on. Now I can control this thing. So it's going from, let's say, from 0 to 0.25. So what you will do, let's create a animate number, okay, and also create a time info node and just connect the frame to time and result to end. So I want the value to start from 0 and end to 0.25, which will complete in, let's say, 20 frames. And when you scrub the timeline, you can see you can do that, but obviously the counter is now 10.21 ms, something 10 ms. So if I set this to once per frame, and you have to keep this thing active, let's just play the timeline for once for 20 frames at least. Okay, and now you see the performance is now 3 ms. So you have to keep this thing on though, otherwise it won't update. You have to keep this thing on, but all the animation properties are stored per frame, and you can see that it's not affecting a lot. Okay, so this is how you use the once per frame thing. Pretty cool. Alright, so let's move on to the other things. Sometimes this number does not mean anything because it's shows that it's under control, but you will get a laggy performance in the viewport. So let me show you an example of that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to duplicate the same node again, and let's set this to disabled, and set this to 0 and 1, and this time I'm going to use a different spline object. So go to the spline, create a transform node, and we'll use the same Bezier curve that we are using as our host spline, and we're going to transform it. So we'll create a matrix compose, and because this group node expects a list node, it cannot automatically convert it. Don't do that, and just click on the retry. It just panicked for a moment. No problem. So no problem, I'm going to create a spline list and connect it, and now I can click on this cross button, and it will remove all the empty objects, and now I can connect it to the list. Okay, and let's create a object output and just create this. You see we have a lot of elements here. Let's set the copies to, let's see, 150, and scale it up, or let's scale it down and scale this thing up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the curve on the x-axis 90 degrees and scale it down, so they will basically become circles. And if you go to the curve options, set this to 2D and set the fill mode to both, so you'll get something like this. Okay, and now let's set this thing a little bit like this one. Set this let's turn. Now you can see that the performance is getting a little bit laggy, and why is that? And let's create a few copies, 5, and it's pretty laggy. You don't. So if I go into the wireframe, you don't see anything, but you can see that here in the info, in the header, in the menu panel, whatever, number of faces is 34,500. Okay, and yeah, and if you go to the timeline and try to scrub that, this is pretty laggy. If you play the timeline, you'll see that the frame rate I'm getting is 1 FPS. So what can I do? You can see that the animation node is working pretty well, and it has 24 ms or whatever, but it's not getting. Let's say if I set this to 1 time, does it make any sense? It does not. But if I disable this thing, now it should work. It's working pretty good. All right, and so this is the thing. Maybe I turn on disable clear cache, turn on this thing, and just scale it down a little bit more. I'm going to make the copies to 1 just for the moment, and turn something like this, say 0.06, and then I increase the number of copies. Oh, not 6, and set this to 1 time. Turn this thing off. Pretty manageable. All right, And you know, sometimes you can see in the curves panel, the preview is set to 12, and render is set to 1. And sometimes when you hit the render button, it will crash because it has a lot of faces, polygons. You have to keep an eye on polygon counts. So what you can do in this case is you just turn on the preview resolution. Okay, so I turn that thing on. I'm gonna set this to 1 or 0. Okay, you see some interesting shapes appeared in here. They all became squares. Wow. Set this to 2. They are like 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. What do you call hexagon? Not octagons. All right, so I'm gonna set this to 1. So that's the way you just and you see that the number of faces has decreased now to 1500. Okay, so that's how you keep things under control. All right, so we have did something like this with one node, and this is under control, 2 milliseconds, and that's what we want. All right guys, I think I have covered everything I wanted. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this video, please subscribe to this channel, give this video a thumbs up and share it a lot. And what else? Yeah, if you click on the subscribe button, make sure that you have clicked the bell icon right next to it, so that whenever I upload a new video, you will get a notification. Okay, so thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.